Environmental group Green Connection has approached the courts to have energy regulator NERSA's decision to award 3 generating licenses to controversial Turkish company Karpowership set aside. It approved the licenses for Karpowership at Saldanha Bay, Kucha and Richards Bay. NERSA had granted the 3 licenses for the floating partnerships power ships and 4 others in September last year without releasing the full reasons behind their decision. Green Connection filed their papers in the Pretoria High Court to have NERSA's decision reviewed. Civil body OUTA has also approached the courts over the matter. They claim the price of electricity will skyrocket if the Karpowership deal goes through. They also want the courts to halt it. Green Connection has raised concerns over the negative impact of the floating power ships being brought to the country and the company being granted licenses to operate over a 20-year period to fill a short-term electricity supply gap. The licenses were granted as part of the Department of Energy's Risk Mitigation Independent Power Producer Program. Now, to talk a little bit more about this, we're joined now by Wayne Duvenage from the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. Very good evening to you, Wayne. Thanks for chatting to us once again. So let's just start with the court action. You want it, the decision by NERSA to be reviewed and set aside. Is there anything specifically or in its totality?
Well, in its totality, because there are a number of factors that have been overlooked when making this decision. I mean, within NERSA's own rules, they need to grant licenses only once environmental authorization has been given, that the Ports Authority permits have been provided, as well as, and most importantly, the power purchase agreements that Eskom would have to sign. And then there's this whole issue of an emergency procurement through this risk mitigation process, whereby this is granted for 20 years. And if one looks at the costs of this over that period, about 200 billion rand, this is not in the best interest of society. So we don't believe they've applied their mind, and we would like the entire decision to be reviewed.
Okay, so let's just start with what you say in terms of NERSA's decision. You call it irrational and unreasonable. Is it over all of these factors that we've listed? And I want us to take it point by point, because some of it is a little bit technical for the layman to understand. So let's just start with the considerations that you say are relevant and were not taken into account. Let's just begin there.
Well, NERSA's own decision-making process, we believe, was procedurally unfair, and it lacked transparency, and significant portions of the license application was redacted. They also never provided the reasons specifically with regards to the tariffs, which are very important in decisions of this nature, because it is the public that have to pay those tariffs in their decisions. So, we believe that it's a public participation process that has not been applied correctly, and if government doesn't do so properly, it fails at the first hurdle.
Wait, let me just start there before you continue with the others. In terms of the tariff, one was to understand that there is a baseline or across-the-board tariff that is applied for supplies, the consumption of electricity. Are we saying in this deal that it's different? What were the exceptions for these deviations?
Well, what we're saying is that at the time of their submission, they had come in at R1.50 per kilowatt hour. That price is well over that, and we put it now at R5 per kilowatt hour, which is 3 times alternative options that were available to the department. And so, one has to ask why do we have to subject ourselves to these massive increases? We know that the price of gas is not going to stay the same, as opposed to other options that were provided, which were set at a price that weren't going to fluctuate the way these liquid gas prices were going to fluctuate. So that's a big factor in this case, and NERSA has not applied its mind.
Okay. Now, just on, okay, let me allow you to finish your other points before we get to the environmental factors.
Well, it's mainly those issues of environmental authorizations, ports authorizations, the fact that there are no power purchase agreements, and then the tariffs. With all of those factors combined, this decision is very premature. I mean, it lacks in the transparency that is required, and unless we get that those details into the decision-making process, we cannot believe that NERSA has applied its mind in this decision.
And is part of the reason why you're questioning the deal and you're taking it to the courts to review it and set aside being the Department of Environmental Affairs refusing to grant environmental authorization for this? And what was the reason, to your understanding, for that?
Well, I think they are still undergoing a review. They had got specialists in to unpack the impacts of the car power ships in those harbours. That decision hasn't been made as far as we understand it. And unless you have that environmental authorization, they just simply cannot go to the step of the decision of granting those licenses. So it was a hasty decision. It also appears to us, and we put that in our papers, that NERSA was favouring the financial situation of car power ships and not those of the public, who it's supposed to protect in this decision, as was worded in one of their documents in making this decision.
The issue of the environmental impact on the populace around those harbours or water supply areas that Karpowership is said to be doing this work. I know that small-scale fishing farm communities were mentioned. What is the anticipated impact from either the studies that you've seen or the dangers it poses for Karpowership to do the work that it intends to do there?
I think it's a little bit unknown, and that's why it's important to get the reports. Our objection has not been based heavily on the various environmental factors, other than the environmental authorization hadn't been obtained. But from what we can tell and what we can gather, it's not a positive impact. It's a negative impact, and one needs to, I think, do some more research, as the Department of Environmental Affairs has indicated it is doing, to determine what that impact of these power ships have in the immediate environment where they are located for long periods of time.
Again, in layman's terms, what are these three power ships going to do? Because we can talk about it from an academic point of view, but somebody who's watching would want to understand, if this is going to benefit us, why are we opposed to it? What exactly is it going to do in terms of environmental degradation? And you mentioned that it will be unfair to consumers. There is lack of transparency in the tariff basing. But what exactly is the work that they're going to do?
Well, these are, just imagine them as three floating power stations that generate electricity from gas. Gas is bought in, it is purchased and then bought into those three floating power stations, which convert the gas into electricity. But it goes through a whole process. The electricity's got to be taken from those gas turbines and onto land. So there's a whole conversion process. There's licenses, by the way, that are required for the installation of those gas and conversion processes as well, which are still outstanding. So that's really, in essence, I mean, in layman's terms, what it's about. But it's not a case of, these ships arrive tomorrow and the power gets turned on. This is a year to 2 years in the making, once the approvals are given, once the financial foreclosures has taken place, and that hasn't taken place as yet, so it hasn't been financially approved. And these are, just compound all of those problems against the alternatives that had the risk mitigation options of renewable energy being given at some time back when they could have been given, we'd be a long way down and have those options available to procure and put the energy requirements of this 200 megawatts into the grid within the next year.
And this is, as you say, 20 years for just to add 2,000 megawatts of electricity to the grid. You mentioned the power purchase and risk agreements earlier on as being problematic, and I'd like to hear from you. So Eskom had required the winner of the tender to not to indemnify it against any adverse outcomes from corruption allegations. What is the rationale behind this? And does it also imply that we know that DNG Power Holdings also took the matter to court as a losing bidder? What were some of the salient issues behind the allegations of corruption? And could they have perhaps done better? Or would they have been perceived to have done better?
Well, we don't know, and we haven't been watching that case too clearly. We know it has been appealed and is going to the higher courts, and we would obviously watch that judgment or those judgments as they come out. But I think what Eskom is doing is it is concerned that if in the event there is corruption or problems found in this transaction with Karpowerships, that they don't want to be forced or lumbered with additional costs. So they're asking themselves to be exonerated from any wrongdoing in that regard. That was put forward last week by Eskom. And we've also, have them as a respondent in this matter to ask them not to grant those power purchase agreements until the process, or until this review has been heard in this process of public consultation and all the necessary authorizations and the rationale and the logic is applied properly, so that we can, if the courts rule against Karpowerships, well then, Eskom doesn't have to provide those power purchase agreements.
Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us the reasons behind your court bid. Wayne Duvenage, he's the CEO of OUTA, the organization undoing tax abuse. All right.